Hi. Hi everyone. Oh my gosh, this is exciting. I have a lamp this time. Yay. It's not as dark. There we go. There we go. There we go. Hi. Oh, what's up? How are we? You excited? I'm excited. Oh my gosh. This is going to be a long one. We are tackling part 2 of chapter 3, which is, let me find the end of it. It's long. It's a long one. Let's see. It is. Oh, it's very long. It is about 60 pages. So, get excited. We've got a lot to get through tonight. If I end up dying or something, like I can't read anymore, then we might have to just like do a little bit of the 3rd chapter in our next live. But hopefully we can get through all of it. I my Gatorade, keep my energy up. I'm ready to go. I'm sorry, I don't know if you guys can hear all the noise outside. My family's having a fire right now, and I'm inside reading. So yeah, if there's a lot of noise, I'm sorry. If my family comes in at any time, I'm sorry. I told them I'm doing homework. So, all right. Are we all ready? I'm ready. Let's get into it. This is chapter 3, the 6 phone calls, part 2, starting with Eddie Kasprak takes his medicine. If you would know all there is to know about an American man or... Oh, wait, sorry, I'm starting over in a second. Where's my bookmark? There's my bookmark. Anyways, Eddie Kasprak takes his medicine. If you would know all there is to know about an American man or woman of the middle class as the millennium nears its end, you would need only to look in his or her medicine cabinet, or so it has been said. But dear Lord, get a look into this one as Eddie Kasprak slides it open, mercifully sliding aside his white face and wide, staring eyes. On the top shelf there is Anacin, Excedrin PM, Contact, Gelisul, Tylenol, and a large blue jar of Vicks, looking a bit of a brooding deep twilight under glass. There's a bottle of Vivarin, a bottle of Serotin, that's Nature's spelled backwards, the ads on Lawrence Week used to say when Eddie Kasprak was but a wee slip of the lad, and 2 bottles of Phillips milk of magnesia, the regular, which tastes like liquid chalk, and the new mint flavor, which tastes like mint-flavored liquid chalk. Here's a large bottle of Rolaids standing chummily close to a large bottle of Tums. The Tums are standing next to a large bottle of orange-flavored D-gel tablets. The three of them look like a trio of strange piggy banks, stuffed with pills instead of dimes. Second shelf, and dig the vites. You got your E, your C with rose hips. You got B simple and B complex and B12. There's L-lysine, which is supposed to do something about those embarrassing skin problems, and lecithin, which is supposed to do something about that embarrassing cholesterol buildup in and around the big pump. There's iron, calcium, and cod liver oil. There's 1-a-day multiples, Myodex multiples, Centrum multiples, and sitting up on the top of the cabinet itself is a gigantic bottle of Geritol, just for good measure. Moving right along to Eddie's 3rd shelf, we find the utility infielders of the patent medicine world, X-Lax, Carter's Little Pills. Those 2 keep Eddie Kasprak moving the mail. Here nearby is Chiopictate, Pepto-Bismol, and Preparation H, just in case the mail moves too fast or too painfully. Also some tucks in a screw-top jar just to keep everything tidy after the mail has gone through, be it just an advertising circular with 2 addressed to occupant or a big old special delivery package. Here's Formula 44 for coughs, NyQuil and Dristin for colds, and a big bottle of castor oil. There's a tin of Sucrets in case Eddie's throat gets sore, and there's a Quartet Amart mouthwashes. Chloraseptic, Cepacol, and Cespistat in the spray bottle, and of course good old Listerine, often imitated but never duplicated. Vicine and Murine for the eyes, Cortade and Neosporin ointment for the skin, the second line of defense if the L-lysine doesn't live up to expectations. A tube of Oxy 5 and a bottle of Oxy Wash, because Eddie would definitely rather have a few less cents and a few more zits. And some tetracline. Some pills. Some more pills. Yeah. And off to one side, clustered like bitter And off to one side, clustered like bitter conspirators, are 3 bottles of coal tar shampoo. The bottom shelf is almost deserted, but the stuff which is here means serious business. You could cruise on this stuff okay. On this stuff, you could fly higher than Ben Hanscom's jet and crash harder than Thurman Munson's. There's Valium, Percodan, Elavil, and Darwin Complex. There's also another secrets bottle on this low shelf, but there are no secrets in it. If you opened that one, you would find 6 Quaaludes. Eddie Kasparek believed in the Boy Scout motto. He was swinging a blue tote bag as he came into the bathroom. He set it on the sink, unzipped it, and then, with trembling hands, he began to spill bottles and jars and tubes and squeeze bottles and spray bottles into it. Under other circumstances, he would have taken them out handful by handful, but there was no time for such niceties now. The choice, as Eddie saw it, was as simple as it was brutal. Get moving and keep moving, or stand in one place long enough to start thinking about what all of this meant and simply die of fright. Eddie, Myra. Oh, is it Myra or Mira? Oh my gosh. They say Myra in the movies. I always pronounce it as Mira. Is it Myra or is it Mira? I'll say Myra, because they say Myra in the movie. Okay, Myra is Eddie's wife. If they're gonna say that, okay. Anyways, Eddie, Myra called from downstairs. Eddie, what are you doing? Eddie dropped the secrets box containing the ludes into the bag. The medicine cabinet was now entirely empty except for Myra's Myadol and a small, almost used-up tube of Blistex. He paused for a moment, then grabbed the Blistex. He started to zip the bag closed, debated, and then threw in the Myadol as well. She could always buy more. Eddie! From halfway up the stairs now. Eddie zipped the bag the rest of the way closed and then left the bathroom, swinging it by his side. He was a short man with a timid, rabbity sort of face. Much of his hair was gone. What was left grew in listless, piebald patches. The weight of the bag pulled him noticeably to one side. An extremely large woman was climbing slowly to the second floor. Eddie could hear the stairs creak protestingly under her. What are you doing? Eddie did not need to shrink to tell him that he had, in a sense, married his mother. Myra Kasparek was huge. She'd only been big when Eddie married her 5 years ago, but he sometimes thought his subconscious had seen the potential for hugeness in her. God knew his mother had been a whopper. And she looked somehow more huge than ever as she reached the second-floor landing. She was wearing a white nightgown which swelled comber-like at bosom and hip. Her face, devoid of makeup, was white and shiny. She looked badly frightened. I have to go away for a while, Eddie said. What do you mean you have to go away? What was that telephone call? Nothing, he said, fleeing abruptly down the hallway to their walk-in closet. He put the tote bag down, opened the closet's fold-back door, and raked aside the half-dozen identical black suits which hung there, as conspicuous as a thundercloud among the other, more brightly colored clothes. He always wore one of the black suits when he was working. He went into the closet, smelling mothballs and wool, pulled out one of the suitcases from the back. He opened it and began throwing clothes in. Her shadow fell over him. What's this about, Eddie? Where are you going? You tell me. I can't tell you. She stood there watching him, trying to decide what to say next, or what to do. The thought of simply bundling him into the closet and standing with her back against the door until this madness had passed across her mind. But she was unable to bring herself to do it, although she certainly could have. She was 3 inches taller than Eddie and outweighed him by 100 pounds. She couldn't think of what to do or say because this was so utterly unlike him. She could not have been any more dismayed or frightened if she had walked into the television room and found their new big-screen TV floating in the air. You can't go, she heard herself saying. You promised you'd get me Al Pacino's autograph. It was an absurdity, God knew it was, but at this point, even an absurdity was better than nothing. You'll still get it, Eddie said. You'll have to drive him yourself. Oh, here was a new terror to join that was already circling in her poor, dazzled head. She uttered a small scream. I can't! I never! You'll have to, he said. He was examining his shoes now. There's no one else. Neither of my uniforms fit anymore. They're too tight in the tits. Had Dolores let one of them out, he said implacably. He threw 2 pairs of shoes back, found an empty shoebox, and popped a third pair into it. Good black shoes, plenty of use left in them still, but looking just a bit too worn to wear on the job. When he drove rich people around New York for a living, many of them famous rich people, everything had to look just right. These shoes no longer looked just right, but he supposed they would do for where he was going, and for whatever he might have to do when he got there. Maybe Richie Tozier would. But then the blackness threatened, and he felt his throat beginning to close up. Eddie realized with real panic that he had packed the whole damn drugstore and had left the most important thing of all, his aspirator, downstairs on top of the stereo cabinet. I'm marking that one of his first thoughts was, maybe Richie Tozier would. He has to bring his nice shoes because maybe Richie Tozier would something. I wonder what he was thinking. Anyways. We know what he was thinking. Anyways. He banged the suitcase closed and latched it. He looked around at Myra, who was standing there in the hallway with her hand pressed against the short, thick column of her neck as if she were the one with the asthma. She was staring at him, her face full of perplexity and terror, and he might have felt sorry for her if his heart had not already been so filled with terror for himself. What's happened, Eddie? Who is that on the telephone? Are you in trouble? You are, aren't you? What kind of trouble are you in? He walked toward her, zipper bag in one hand and suitcase in the other, standing more or less straight now that he was more evenly weighted. She moved in front of him, blocking off the stairway, and at first he thought she would not give way. Then when his face was about to crash on the soft roadblock of her breast, she did give way. Fearfully. As he walked past, never slowing, she burst into miserable tears. I can't drive Al Pacino, she bawled. I'll smash into the stop sign or something, I know I will. Eddie, I'm scared. He looked at the Seth Thomas clock on the table by the stairs. 9:20. The canned-sounding Delta clerk had told him he had already missed the last flight north to Maine, that one had left LaGuardia at 8:25. He had called Amtrak and discovered there was a late train to Boston departing Penn Station at 11:30. It would drop him off at South Station, where he could take a cab to the offices of Cape Cod Limousine on Arlington Street. Cape Cod and Eddie's company, Royal Crest, had worked out a useful and friendly reciprocal arrangement over the years. A quick call to Butch Carrington in Boston had taken care of his transportation north. Butch said he would have a Cadillac limo gassed and ready for him. He would go in style with no pain-in-the-ass client, sitting in the back seat, sinking the air up with a big cigar and asking if Eddie knew where he could score abroad or a few grams of coke or both. Going in style, all right, he thought. Only way you can go in more in style was if you were going to be in a hearse. But don't worry, Eddie. That's probably how you'll come back. If there's enough left of you to pick up, that is. Eddie? 9:20. Plenty of time to talk to her, plenty of time to be kind. But it would have been so much better if this had been her whist night. If he could have slipped out, leaving a note under one of the magnets on the refrigerator door. The refrigerator door was where he left all of his notes for Myra, because there she would never miss them. Leaving that way like a fugitive would not have been good, but this was even worse. This was like having to leave home all over again, and that had been so hard. He'd had to do it 3 times. Sometimes home is where the heart is, Eddie thought randomly. I believe that. Old Bobby Frost said home's the place where, when you have to go there, they have to take you in. Fortunately, it's also the place where once you're in there, they don't ever want to let you out. He stood at the head of the stairs, forward motion temporarily spent, filled with fear, breath wheezing noisily in and out of the pinhole his throat has become, and regarded his weeping wife. Come downstairs with me and I'll tell you what I can, he said. Eddie put his 2 bags, clothes in one, medicine in the other, by the door in the front hall. He remembered something else then, or rather, the ghost of his mother, who had been dead many years, but who still spoke frequently in his mind, remembered for him. You know your feet get wet when you're you know your feet get wet, you always get cold. You know when your feet get wet, you always get a cold, Eddie. You're not like other people, you have a very weak system, you have to be careful. That's why you must always wear your rubbers when it rains. It rained a lot in Derry. Eddie opened the front hall closet, got his rubbers off the hook where they hung neatly in a plastic bag, and put them in his clothes suitcase. That's a good boy, Eddie. He and Myra had been watching TV when the shit hit the fan. Eddie went into the television room and pushed the button which lowered the screen of the Mural Vision TV. Its screen was so big that it made Freeman McNeil look like a visitor from Brobdingnag on Sunday afternoons. He picked up the telephone and called a taxi. The dispatcher told him it would probably be 15 minutes. Eddie said that was no problem. He hung up and grabbed his aspirate off the top of their expensive Sony compact disc player. I spent $1,500 on a state-of-the-art sound system so that Myra wouldn't miss a single golden note on her Barry Manilow records and her Supreme's greatest hits, he thought. And then felt a flush of guilt. That wasn't fair. He knew damn well it. Myra would have been just as happy with her old scratchy records as she was with the new 45 RPM sized laser discs, just as she would have been happy to keep on living in that little 4-room house in Queens until they were both old and gray. And if truth were told, there was a little snow on Eddie Casbrack's mountain already. He had bought the luxury sound system for the same reasons that he had bought this low fieldstone house on Long Island, where the two of them often rattled around like the last two peas in a can, because he had been able to, because they were ways of appeasing the soft, frightened, often bewildered, always implacable voice of his mother. They were ways of saying, "I made it, Ma. Look at all this. I made it. Will you please, for Christ's sake, shut up a while?" Eddie stuffed the aspirator into his mouth and, like a man miming suicide, pulled the trigger. A cloud of awful licorice taste roiled and boiled its way down his throat, and Eddie breathed deeply. He could feel breathing passages which had almost closed start to open up again. The tightness in his chest started to ease, and suddenly he heard voices in his mind. Ghost voices. "Didn't you get the note I sent you? Didn't you get the note I sent you?" "I got it, Mrs. Casbrack, but, well, in case you can't read, Coach Black, let me tell you in person. Are you ready?" "Mrs. Casbrack." "Good, here it comes, from my lips to your ears. Ready? My Eddie cannot take physical education. I repeat, he cannot take phys ed. Eddie is very delicate, and if he runs or jumps, Mrs. Casbrack, I have the results of Eddie's latest physical on my file in the office. That's a state requirement. It says that Eddie is a little small for his age, but otherwise he's absolutely normal. So I called your family's physician just to be sure, and he confirmed." "Are you saying I'm a liar, Coach Black? Is that it? Well, here he is. Here's Eddie standing right beside me. Can you hear the way he's breathing, can you?" "Mom, please, I'm all right." "Eddie, you know better than that. I taught you better than that. Don't interrupt your elders." "I hear Mrs. Casbrack, but do you? Good. I thought maybe you were deaf. He sounds like a truck going uphill in low gear, doesn't he? And if that isn't asthma, Mom, I'll be quiet, Eddie. Don't interrupt me again. If that isn't asthma, Coach Black, then I'm Queen Elizabeth." "Mrs. Casbrack, Eddie often seems very well and happy in the physical education classes. He loves to play games and runs quite fast. In my conversation with Dr. Baines, the word psychosomatic came up. I wonder if you've considered the possibility that my son is crazy? Is that what you're trying to say? Are you trying to say that my son is crazy?" "No, but he's delicate, Mrs. Casbrack. My son is very delicate. Mrs. Casbrack, Dr. Baines confirmed that he could find nothing at all physically wrong," Eddie finished. The memory of that humiliating encounter, his mother screaming at Coach Black in the Derry Elementary School gymnasium while he gasped and cringed at her side and the other kids huddled around one of the baskets and watched, had recurred to him tonight for the first time in years. Nor was that the only memory which Mike Hanlon's call was going to bring back, he knew. He could feel many others as bad or even worse, crowding and jostling like sale-mad shoppers bottlenecked in a department store doorway. But soon the bottleneck would break and they would be along. He was quite sure of that. And What would they find on sale? His sanity? Could be. Half price. Smoke and water damage. Everything must go. Nothing physically wrong, he repeated. Took a deep, shuddery breath and stuffed the aspirator into his pocket. Eddie, Myra said, please tell me what this is all about. Tear tracks shone on her chubby cheeks. Her hands twisted restlessly together like a pair of pink and hairless animals at play. Once, shortly before actually proposing marriage, he had taken a picture of Myra, which she had given him, and had put it next to one of his mother, who had died of congestive heart failure at the age of 64. At the time of her death, Eddie's mother had topped the scales at over 400 pounds, 406 to be exact. She had become something nearly monstrous by then. Her body had seen nothing more than boobs and butt and belly, all overtopped by her pasty, perpetually dismayed face. But the picture of her, which he put next to Myra's picture, had been taken in 1944, 2 years before he had been born. You were a very sickly baby, the ghost mom now whispered in his ear. Many times we despaired of your life. In 1944, his mother had been relatively svelte. I don't know what that word is. On 180 pounds. He had made that comparison, he supposed, in a last-ditch effort to stop himself from committing psychological incest. He looked from mother to Myra, and back to mother. They could have been sisters. The resemblance was that close. Eddie looked at the two nearly identical pictures and promised himself that he would not do this crazy thing. He knew that the boys at work were already making jokes about Jack Sprat and his wife, but they didn't know the half of it. The jokes and snide remarks he could take, but did he really want to be a clown in such a Freudian circus at this? No, he did not. He would break it off with Myra. He let her down gently because she was really very sweet and had even less experience with men than he'd had with women. And then, after she finally sailed over the horizon of his life, he could maybe take those tennis lessons he'd been thinking of for such a long time. Eddie often seems very well and happy in his physical education classes. Or there was the pool membership they were selling at the UN Plaza Hotel. Eddie loves to play games. Not to mention that health club which had opened up on 3rd Avenue across from the garage. Eddie runs quite fast. He runs quite fast when you're not here, runs quite fast when there's nobody around to remind him of how delicate he is. And I see in his face, Mrs. Casbrack, that he knows even now, at the age of 9, he knows that the biggest favor in the world he could do himself would be to run fast in any direction you're not going to let him go. Mrs. Casbrack let him run. But in the end, he married Myra anyway. In the end, the old ways and the old habits had simply been too strong. Home was the place where, when you have to go there, they have to chain you up. Oh, might have beaten his mother's ghost. It might have been hard, but he was quite sure he could have done that much. If that had been all which needed doing. It was Myra herself who had ended up tipping the scales away from independence. Myra had condemned him with solicitude, had nailed him with concern, and chained him with sweetness. Myra, like his mother, reacted with the final fatal insight into his character. Eddie was all the more delicate because he sometimes suspected he was not delicate at all. Eddie needed to be protected from his own dim intimations of possible bravery. On rainy days, Myra always took his rubbers out of the plastic bag in the closet and put them by the coat rack next to the door. Beside his plate of unbuttered wheat toast each morning was a dish of what might have been taken at a casual glance for a multicolored, pre-sweetened children's cereal, which a closer look would have revealed to be a whole spectrum of vitamins, most of which Eddie had in his medicine bag right now. Myra, like mother, understood, and there really had been no chance for him. As a young unmarried man, he had left his mother 3 times and returned home to her 3 times. Then, 4 years after his mother had died in the front hall of her Queen's apartment, blocking the front door so completely with her bulk that the Medq guys called by the people downstairs, and they heard the monstrous thud of Mrs. Casbrack going down for the final count, had to break in through the locked door between the apartment's kitchen and the service stairwell. He had returned home for the 4th and final time. At least, he had believed that it was the final time. Home again, jiggity jog, home again, with Myra the hog. A hog she was, but she was a sweet hog, and he loved her, and there had really been no chance for him at all. She had drawn him into her with the fatal hypnotizing snake's eye of understanding. Home again forever, he had thought then. But maybe I was wrong, he thought. Maybe this isn't home, nor ever was. Maybe home is where I have to go tonight. Home is the place where, when you go, you have to finally face the thing in the dark. He shuddered helplessly, as if he had gone outside without his rubbers and caught a terrible chill. Eddie, please! She was beginning to weep again. Tears of her final defense. Just as they had always been his mother's, the soft weapon which paralyzes, which turns kindness and tenderness into fatal chinks of one's armor. Not that he'd ever worn much armor anyway. Suits of armor did not seem to fit him very well. Tears had been more than a defense for his mother. They had been a weapon. Myra had rarely used her own tears so caniacally, but caniacally or not, he realized she was trying to use them that way now, and she was succeeding. He couldn't let her. It'd be too easy to think of how lonely it was going to be, sitting in a seat on that train as it barreled north toward Boston through the darkness, the suitcase overhead with his tote bag full of nostrums at his feet, the fear sitting on his chest like a rancid Vicks pack. Too easy to let Myra take him upstairs, make love to him with aspirins and alcohol rub, and put him to bed, where they might or might not make a franker sort of love. They had promised. Myra, listen to me, he said, making his voice purposely dry, purposely matter-of-fact. She looked at him with her wet, naked, terrified eyes. He thought he would try to explain, as best he could, tell her about how Mike Hanlon had called and told him that it had started again, and yes, that most of the others were coming. What came out of his mouth wasn't much saner stuff. Go down to the office first thing in the morning, talk to Phil, tell him I had to take off and that you'll drive Piscino. Eddie, I just can't, she wailed. He's a big star. If I get lost, he'll shout at me. I know he will. He'll shout. They all do when the driver gets lost, and I'll cry. It could be an accident. There probably will be an accident, Eddie. Eddie, you have to stay home. For God's sake, stop it. She recoiled from his voice, hurt, although Eddie gripped his aspirator. He would not use it. She recoiled from his voice, hurt, although Eddie gripped his aspirator. He would not use it. She would see that as a weakness, one she could use against him. Dear God, if you are there, please believe me when I say I don't want to hurt Myra. I don't want to cut her. I don't even want to bruise her, but I promised. We all promised. We swore in blood. Please help me, God, because I have to do this. I hate it when you shout at me, Eddie, she whispered. Myra, I hate it when I have to, he said, and she winced. There you go, Eddie. Murder again. Why don't you go punch her around the room a few times? That'd probably be kinder and quicker. Suddenly, probably it was the thought of punching someone around the room which caused the image to come, he saw the face of Henry Bowers. It was the first time he had thought of Bowers in years, and it did nothing for his peace of mind. Nothing at all. He closed his eyes briefly and opened them again and said, You won't get lost and he won't shout at you. Mr. Piscino is very nice, very understanding. He had never driven Piscino before in his life, but contented himself with knowing that at least the law of averages was on his side of this lie. According to popular myth, most celebrities were shitheads, but Eddie had driven enough of them to know if it usually wasn't true. There were, of course, exceptions to the rule, and in most cases the exceptions were real monstrosities. He hoped fervently, for Myra's sake, that Piscino wasn't one of those. Is he? She asked timidly. Yes, he is. How do you know? Demetrius drove him 2 or 3 times when he worked at Manhattan Limousine, Eddie said glibly. He said Mr. Piscino always tipped at least $50. I wouldn't care if he only tipped me 50 cents as long as he didn't shout at me. Myra, it's all as easy as 1, 2, 3. 1, you make the pickup at the St. Regis tomorrow at 7 p.m. Take him over to the ABC building. They're retaping the last act of this play Piscino's in, American Buffalo, I think it's called. 2, you take him back to the St. Regis around 11. 3, you go back to the garage, turn in the car, and sign the green sheet. That's all. That's all. You can do it standing on your head, Marty. Susie giggled at this pet name, and now she looked at him with a painful childlike solemnity. What if he wants to go out to dinner instead of back to the hotel? or for drinks, or for dancing. I don't think he will, but if he does, you can take him. If it looks like he's going to party all night, you can call Phil Thomas on the radio phone after midnight. By then he'll have a driver free to relieve you. I'd never stick you with something like this in the first place if I had a driver who was free, but I got 2 guys out sick, Demetrius on vacation, and everyone else booked up solid. We'll be snug in your own bed by 1 in the morning, Marty. 1 in the morning at the very, very latest. I absolutely guarantee it. She didn't laugh at absolutely either. He cleared his throat and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Instantly, the ghost mom whispered, "Don't sit that way, Eddie. It's bad for your posture and it cramps your lungs. You have very delicate lungs." He sat up straight again, hardly aware he was doing it. My jaw hurts. My jaw really hurts. I'm reading you guys' comments. I like the wait. Are the sober juice called tennis lessons now? That's funny. Good one. I like that one. Why does my jaw hurt? Whatever. This better be the only time I have to drive, she nearly moaned. I've turned into such a horse in the last 2 years. My uniforms look so bad now. It's the only time, I swear. Who called you, Eddie? As if on cue, lights swept across the hall. A horn honked once as the cab turned into the driveway. He felt a surge of relief. They had spent the 15 minutes talking about Pacino instead of Derry and Mike Hanlon and Henry Bowers, and that was good. Good for Myra, good for him as well. He did not want to spend any time thinking or talking about those things till he had to. Eddie stood up. It's my cab. She got up so fast she tripped over the hem of her own nightgown and fell forward. Eddie caught her, but for a moment the issue was in grave doubt. She outweighed him by 100 pounds. She was beginning to blubber again. Eddie, you have to tell me. I can't, there's no time. You never kept anything from me before, Eddie, she wept. And I'm not now, not really. I don't remember it all, at least not yet. The man who called is an old friend. He'll get sick, she said desperately, following him as he walked toward the front hall again. I know you will. Let me come, Eddie. Please, I'll take care of you. Pacino can get a cab or something. It won't kill him. What do you say? Okay? Her voice was rising, becoming frantic, and to Eddie's horror, she began to look more and more like his mother. His mother as she had looked in the last months before she died, old and fat and crazy. I'll rub your back and see that you get your pills. I'll help you. I won't talk if you don't want me to, but you can tell me everything, Eddie. Eddie, please don't go. Eddie, please, please. He was striding down the hall to the front door now, walking blind, head down, moving as a man moves against a high wind. He was wheezing again. When he picked up the bags, each of them seemed to weigh 100 pounds. He could feel her plump pink hands on him, touching, exploring, pulling to helpless desire, but no real strength, trying to seduce him with her sweet tears of concern, trying to draw him back. I'm not going to make it, he thought desperately. The asthma was worse now, worse than it had been since he was a kid. He reached for the doorknob, but it seemed to be receding from him, receding into the blackness of outer space. If you stay, I'll make you a sour cream coffee cake, she blabbled. We'll have popcorn. I'll make your favorite turkey dinner. I'll make it for breakfast tomorrow morning if you want. I'll start right now and give it gravy. Eddie, please, I'm scared. You're scaring me so bad. She grabbed his collar and pulled him backward, like a beefy cop pulling the grab on a suspicious fellow who was trying to flee. With a final, fading effort, Eddie kept going. When he was at the absolute end of his strength and ability to resist, he felt her grip tail away. She gave one final wail. His fingers closed around the doorknob. How blessedly cool it was. He pulled the door open and saw a checker cab sitting out there, an ambassador from the land of sanity. The night was clear, the stars were bright and lucid. He turned back to Myra, whistling and wheezing. You need to understand that this isn't something I want to do, he said. If I had a choice, any choice at all, I wouldn't go. Please understand that, Marty. I'm going, but I'll be coming back. Oh, but that felt like a lie. Yes, it is a lie. He's not coming back. This video. Wait, I want to highlight that. Like a highlighter. Do I have a highlighter? There's a highlighter. You can see my snacks. Oh, but that felt like a lie. When? How long? A week. Or maybe 10 days. Surely no longer than that. A week? She screamed, clutching at her bosom like a diva in a bad opera. A week? 10 days? Please, Eddie, please. Marty, stop. Okay, just stop. For a wonder, she did. Stopped and stood looking at him with her wet, bruised eyes. Not angry at him, only terrified for him and coincidentally for herself. And for perhaps the first time in all the years he had known her, he felt that he could love her safely. Was that part of the going away? He supposed it was. No, you could flush the supposed. He knew it was. Already he felt like something living in the wrong end of a telescope. But it was maybe all right. Was that what he meant? That he had finally decided it was all right to love her? That it was all right even though she looked like his mother when his mother had been younger, and even though she ate brownies in bed while watching Hardcastle and McCormick or Falcon Crest, Crumbs always got on his side even though she wasn't all that bright, and even though she understood and condoned his remedies in the medicine cabinet because she kept her own in the refrigerator? Or could it be that these other ideas were all things he considered in one way or another, at one time or another, during his oddly entwined lives as a son and a lover and a husband? Now on the point of leaving home for what felt like the absolutely last time, a new possibility came to him. And startled wonder brushed him like the wing of some large bird. Could it be that Myra was even more frightened than he was? Could it be that his mother had been? Another dairy memory came shooting up from his subconscious like a balely fizzing firework. There had been a shoe store downtown on Center Street, the Shoe Boat. His mother had taken him there one day. He thought he could have been no more than 5 or 6. Told him to sit still and be good while she got a pair of white pumps for a wedding. So he sat still and was good while his mother talked to Mr. Garner, who was one of the shoe clerks. But he was only 5 or maybe 6. And after his mother had rejected the 3rd pair of white pumps Mr. Garner showed her, Eddie got bored and walked over to the far corner to look at something he had spotted there. At first he thought it was just a big crate standing on the end. When he got closer, he decided it was some kind of desk. But it sure was the kookiest desk he had ever seen. It was so narrow. It was made of bright polished wood and lots of curvy inlaid lines and carved do-giggers in it. Do-giggers in it? Something. Also, there was a little flight of 3 stairs leading up to it. He'd never seen a desk with stairs. When he got right up to it, he saw that there was a slot at the bottom of the desk thing, a button on the side, and on top of it, entrancing, was something that looked exactly like Captain Video's space scope. Eddie walked around to the other side, and there was a sign. He must have been at least 6, because he had been able to read it, softly whispering each word aloud. Do your shoes fit right? Check and see. He went back around, climbed the 3 steps up to the little platform, then stuck his foot into the slot at the bottom of the shoe checker. Did his shoes fit right? Eddie didn't know, but he was wild to check and see. He socked his face into the rubber face guard and thumbed the button. Green light flooded his eyes. Eddie gasped. He could see a foot floating inside a shoe filled with green smoke. He wiggled his toes, and the toes he looked at wiggled right back. They were his, all right, just as he had suspected. And then he realized it was not just his toes he could see. He could see his bones, too. The bones in his foot. He crossed his great toe over his second toe, as if sneakily warding off the consequences of telling a lie. And the eldritch bones in the scope made an X that was not white but goblin green. He could see. Then his mother shrieked. A rising sound of panic that cut through the quiet store like a runaway reaper blade, like a fire bell, like doom on a horseback. He jerked his startled, dismayed face out of the viewer and saw her pelting toward him across the store in her stocking feet, her dress flying out behind her. She knocked a chair over and one of those shoe measuring things that always tickled his feet when flying. Her bosom heaved. Her mouth was a scarlet O of horror. Faces turned to follow her progress. Eddie, get off of there! She screamed. Get off of there! Those machines give you cancer! Get off of there, Eddie! Eddie! He backed away as if the machine had suddenly grown red-hot, and in his startled panic he forgot the little flight of stairs behind him. His heels dropped over the top one, and he stood there, slowly falling backward, his arms pinwheeling wildly in a losing battle to retain his departing balance. And he hadn't thought with a kind of mad joy, "I'm going to fall. I'm going to find out what it feels like to fall and bump my head. Goody for me!" Hadn't he thought that? Or was it only the man imposing his own self-serving adult ideas over whatever his child mind, always roaring in with confused surmises and half-perceived images which lost their sense in their very brightness, had thought, or tried to think. Either way, it was a moot question. He had not fallen. His mother had gotten there in time. His mother had caught him. He had burst into tears, but he had not fallen. Everyone had been looking at him. He remembered that. He remembered Mr. Gardner picking up the shoe-measuring thing and checking the little sliding gadgets on it to make sure they were all still okay, while another clerk righted the fallen chair and then flapped his arms once in amused disgust before putting on his pleasantly neutral salesman face again. Mostly, he remembered his mother's wet cheek and her hot, sour breath. He remembered her whispering over and over in his ear, "Don't you ever do that again. Don't you ever do that again. Don't you ever." It was what his mother chanted to ward off trouble. She chanted the same thing a year earlier when she discovered the babysitter had taken Eddie to the public pool in Dairy Park one stifling hot summer day. This had been when the polio scare of the early 50s was just beginning to wind down. She dragged him out of the pool, telling him he must never do that, never, never. And all the kids had looked as all the clerks and customers were looking now, and her breath had that same sour tang. She dragged him out of the shoe boat, shouting at the clerks that she would see all of them in court if there was anything wrong with her boy. Eddie's terrified tears had continued off and on for the rest of the morning. His asthma had been particularly bad all day. That night he lain awake for hours past the time he was usually asleep, wondering exactly what cancer was, if it was worse than polio, if it killed you, how long it took if it did, and how bad it hurt before you died. He also wondered if he would go to hell afterward. My jaw really hurts for some reason. The threat had been serious, he knew that much. She had been so scared. That's how he knew. So terrified. "Marty," he said across the gulf of his years, "would you give me a kiss?" She kissed him and hugged him so tightly while she was doing it that the bones in his back groaned. If we were in water, he thought, she'd drown us both. "Don't be afraid," he whispered in her ear. "Where's my pencil? I'm marking that." "Don't be afraid," he whispered in her ear. "I can't help it," she wailed. "I know," he said, and realized that, even though she was hugging him with rib-breaking tightness, his asthma had eased. That whistling note in his breathing was gone. "I know, Marty." The taxi driver honked again. "Will you call?" she asked him tremulously. "If I can." "Eddie, can't you please tell me what it is?" And suppose he did? How far would it go toward setting her mind to rest? "Marty, I got a call from Mike Hanlon tonight. We talked for a while, but everything we said boiled down to two things. It started again. Mike said, 'Will you come?' Mike said. Oh, it started again, Mike said. 'Will you come?' Mike said. Now I've got a fever, Marty, only it's a fever you can't damp down with aspirin. I've got shortness of breath, and the goddamned aspirator won't I've got a shortness of breath the goddamn aspirator won't touch, because that shortness of breath isn't in my throat or my lungs. It is around my heart. I'll come back to you if I can, Marty, but I feel like I'm a man standing at the mouth of an old mine shaft that is full of cave-ins waiting to happen, standing there and saying goodbye to the daylight." Yes, my yes, that surely would set her mind at rest. "No," he said. "Guess I can't tell you what it is." Before she could say any more, before she could begin again, "Eddie, get out of that taxi! They give you cancer!" He was striding away from her faster and faster. By the time he got to the cab, she was almost running. She was still standing in the doorway when the cab backed into the street, still standing there when they started for the city. A big black woman's shadow cut out of the light spilling from their house. He waved and thought she raised her hand in return. "Where are we headed tonight, my friend?" the cabbie asked. "Penn Station," Eddie said, and his hand relaxed on the aspirator. His asthma had gone to wherever it went to brood between its assaults on his bronchial tubes. He felt almost well. But he needed the aspirator worse than ever. 4 hours later, coming out of the light doze, all in a single spasmodic jerk that caused the fellow in the business suit across the way to lower his paper and look at him with faintly apprehensive curiosity. "I'm back, Eddie!" the aspirator yelled gleefully. "I'm back, and oh, I don't know, this time I might just kill ya! Why not? Gotta do it sometime, you know. Can't fuck around with you forever." Eddie's chest surged and pulled. He groped for the aspirator, found it, pointed it down his throat, and pulled the trigger. Then he sat back in the tall Amtrak seat, shivering, waiting for relief, thinking of the dream from which he had just awakened. Dream? Christ, that was all. He was afraid it was more memory than dream. In it there had been a green light, like the light inside a shoe store X-ray machine, and a rotting leper had pursued a screaming boy named Eddie Kasparek through tunnels under the earth. He ran and ran. He runs quite fast, Coach Black told his mother. He ran plenty fast with that rotting thing after him. Oh yes, you better believe it. You bet your fur. In this dream when he was 11 years old, and then he had smelled something like a death of time, and someone lit a match, and he looked down and seen the decomposing face of a boy named Patrick Hockstetter, a boy who had disappeared in July of 1958. There were worms crawling in and out of Patrick Hockstetter's cheeks, and that gassy, awful smell was coming from inside of Patrick Hockstetter. And in that dream there was more memory than dream. That was more memory than dream. He looked to one side and seen 2 school books that were fat with moisture and overgrown with green mold. Roads in Everywhere and Understanding Our America. They were in their current condition because it was foul wetness down there. How I Spent My Summer Vacation, themed by Patrick Hockstetter. I spent it dead in a tunnel. Moss grew on my books, and they swelled up to the size of Sears catalogs. Eddie opened his mouth to scream, and that was when the scabrous fingers of the leper glittered around his cheek and plunged themselves into his mouth, and that was when he woke up with that back-snapping jerk to find himself not in the sewers under Derry, Maine, but in an Amtrak club car near the head of a train speeding across Rhode Island under a big white moon. And the man across the aisle hesitated, almost thought of better speaking, and then did. "Are you all right, sir?" "Oh, yes," Eddie said. "I fell asleep and had a bad dream. It got my asthma going." "I see." The paper went up again. Eddie saw it was the paper his mother had sometimes referred to as the New York Times. Eddie looked out the window at a sleeping landscape lit only by the fairy moon. Here and there were houses, or sometimes clusters of them, most dark, a few showing lights. But the lights seemed little and falsely mocking compared to the moon's ghost glow. He thought the moon talked to him, he thought suddenly. Henry Bowers. God, he was so crazy. I wonder where Henry Bowers was now. Dead? In prison? Drifting across empty plains somewhere in the middle of the country like an incurable virus. Sticking F7-Elevens in the deep, slumberous hours between 1 and 4 in the morning, or maybe killing some of the people stupid enough to slow down for his cocked thumb in order to transfer the dollars in their wallet to his own. Possible. In a state asylum somewhere, looking up at this moon which is approaching the full, talking to it, listening to answers which only he could hear. Eddie considered this somehow even more possible. He shivered. "I'm remembering my boyhood at last," he thought. "I'm remembering how I spent my own summer vacation that dim, dead year of 1958. He sensed that now he could fix upon almost any scene from that summer he wanted to, but he did not want to. Oh God, if I could only forget it all again. He leaned his forehead against the dirty glass of the window, his aspirator clasped loosely in one hand like a religious artifact, watching as the night flew apart around the train. Going north, he thought, but that was wrong. Not going north, because it's not a train, it's a time machine. Not north, back in time. Thought he heard the moon mutter. Eddie Kasparek held his aspirator tightly and closed his eyes against sudden vertigo. And that's Eddie's part. And I was going to Maine. You said my room is so pretty? Thank you. Thank you very much. That makes me really happy. I'm so tired. But I'm okay. I'm okay. I'm gonna take a little bit of all my snacks. When I read for so long, my eyes just like stop working. My eyes just like aren't working right now, but it's fine. It's fine. All right. I think maybe we shouldn't finish the chapter tonight. I think we should finish Beverly's part, and then maybe do Bill's part, which is 20 pages, in the next live, along with something else. Let me look in here. Yeah. I think we should finish Beverly's part tonight, and then next time do part 6, Bill Denbrough takes time out, and then do the Dairy first interlude. And then get into June of 1958, the following Saturday, or whatever day. I don't know if the days are going to change in October. I don't think they will. I think they'll stay Saturday. All right. So that leaves us with 20 more pages. Let's go. All right. Part 5. Beverly Rogan takes a whooping. Tom was nearly asleep when the phone rang. He struggled halfway up, leaning toward it, and then felt one of Beverly's breasts press against his shoulder as she reached over him to get it. He flopped back on his pillow, wondering dully who was calling on their unlisted home phone number at this hour of night. He heard Beverly say hello, and then he drifted off again. He put away nearly 3 six-packs during the baseball game. He was shagged. Then Beverly's voice, sharp and curious. What? Drilled into his ear like an ice pick and opened his eyes again. He tried to sit up, and the phone cord dug into his thick neck. Get that fucking thing off me, Beverly, he said, and she got up quickly and walked around the bed, holding the phone cord up with tented fingers. Her hair was a deep red, and it flowed over her nightgown in natural waves almost to her waist. Horsehair. Her eyes did not stutter to his face to read the emotional weather there, and Tom Rogan didn't like that. He sat up. His head was starting to ache. Shit, it probably had already been aching, but when you were asleep, you didn't know it. He went to the bathroom and urinated for what felt like 3 hours, then decided that as long as he was up, he ought to get another beer and try to make the curse of his impending hangover. Try to take the curse of the impending hangover. Passing back through the bedroom on his way to the stairs, a man in white boxers that flapped like sails below his considerable belly, his arms like slabs, he looked more like a Doc Walloper than the president and general manager of Beverly Fashions Incorporated. He looked over his shoulder and yelled crossly, "If it's that bull-dyke Leslie, tell her to go eat out some model and let us sleep." Beverly glanced up briefly, shook her head to indicate it wasn't Leslie, and then looked back at the phone. Tom felt the muscles at the back of his neck tighten up. Felt like a dismissal. Dismissed by Milady, me fucking lady. This was starting to look. It was starting to look like it might turn into a situation. Might be that Beverly needed a short refresher course on who was in charge around here. It was possible. Sometimes she did. She was a slow learner. He went downstairs and padded along the hall to the kitchen, absently picking the seat of his shorts out of the crack of his ass, and opened the refrigerator. His reaching hand closed on nothing more alcoholic than a blue Tupperware dish of leftover noodles Romanoff. All the beer was gone, even the can he kept in the way back, much as he kept a $20 bill folded up behind his driver's license for emergencies, was gone. The game had gone 14 innings, and all for nothing. The White Sox lost. Bunch of candy asses this year. His eyes drifted off to the bottles of hard stuff on the glassed-in shelf over the kitchen bar, and for a moment he saw himself pouring a splash of beam over a single ice cube. Then he walked toward the stairs, knowing that it was asking for even more trouble than his head was currently in. He glanced at the face of the antique pendulum clock at the foot of the stairs and saw it was past midnight. This intelligence did nothing to improve his temper, which was never very good, even at the best of times. He climbed the stairs with slow deliberation, too aware of how hard his heart was working. Kaboom, kathud, kaboom, kathud, kaboom, kathud. Made him nervous when he could feel his heart beating in his ears and wrists as well as his chest. Sometimes when that happened, he would imagine it not as a squeezing and loosening organ, but as a big dial on the left side of his chest with the needle edging ominously onto the red zone. He did not like that shit. He did not need that shit. What he needed was a good night's sleep. With a numb ooh, not gonna say that word. The C word. Oh, I almost said it. But the dumb C word he was married to was still on the phone. I understand that, Mike. Yes. Yes, I am, I know. But a longer pause. Bill Denbrough? She exclaimed, and that ice pick drilled into his ear again. He stood outside the bedroom door until he got his breath back. Now it was a ka-thud, ka-thud, ka-thud again. The booming had stopped. He briefly imagined the needle edging out of the red and then willed the picture back. He was a man, for Christ's sake. And a damned good one, not a furnace with a bad thermostat. He was in great shape, he was iron. If she needed to learn that, he would be happy to teach her. He started in and thought better of it and stood where he was a moment longer, listening to her, not particularly caring about who she was talking to or what she said, only listening to the rising and falling tones of her voice. And what he felt like was a familiar, dull rage. He met her in a downtown Chicago singles bar 4 years ago. Conversation had been easy enough because they both worked in the Standard Brands building and knew a few of the same people. Tom worked for King and Landry, public relations on 42. Beverly Marsh, so she had been then, was an assistant designer at Delia Fashion on 12. Delia, which would later enjoy a modest vogue in the Midwest, catered to young people. Delia skirts and blouses and shawls and slacks was sold largely to what Delia Castleman called youth stores, what Tom called head shops. Tom Rogan knew two things about Beverly Marsh almost at once. She was desirable and she was vulnerable. In less than a month, he knew a third as well. She was talented. Very talented. In her drawings of casual dresses and blouses, he saw a money machine of almost scary potential. Not in the head shops, though, he thought, but did not say, at least not then. No more bad lighting, no more knocked down prices, no more shitty displays somewhere in the back of the store between the dope paraphernalia and the rock group t-shirts. Leave that shit for the tall ones. Leave that shit for the small timers. He'd known a great deal about her before she knew he had any real interest in her, and that was just the way Tom wanted it. He had been looking for someone like Beverly Marsh all his life, and he had moved in with the speed of a lion making a run at a slow antelope. Not that her vulnerability showed on the surface. You looked and saw a gorgeous woman, slim but abundantly stacked. Hips weren't great, maybe, but she had a great ass and the best set of tits he had ever seen. Tom Rogan was a tit man, always had been, and tall girls almost always had disappointing tits. They wore thin shirts, and their nipples drove you crazy. But when you got those thin shirts off, you discovered that nipples were all they really had. Tits themselves looked like pull knobs on a bureau drawer. More than a handful's wasted, his college roommates had been fond of saying. But as far as Tom was concerned, his college roommates had been so full of shit he squeaked going into a turn. Oh, she had been some kind of fine looking, all right, with that dynamite body and that gorgeous fall of red wavy hair. But she was weak somehow. It was as if she was sending out radio signals which only he could receive. He could point to certain things, how much she smoked, but he had almost cured her of that. The restless way her eyes moved, never quite meeting the eyes of whoever she was talking to, only touching them from time to time and then leaping nimbly away. Her habit of lightly rubbing her elbows when she was nervous, the look of her fingernails, which were kept neat but brutally short. Tom noticed this latter the first time he met her. She picked up her glass of white wine. He saw her nails and thought, she keeps them short because she bites them. Lions may not drink, at least not what people think. but they see. And when antelope start away from the waterhole, alerted by that dusty rug scent of approaching death, the cats can observe which one falls to the rear of the pack. Maybe because it has a lame leg, maybe because it was just naturally slower, or maybe because its sense of danger is less developed. And it might be even possible that some antelopes and some women want to be brought down. Suddenly he heard a sound that jerked him rudely out of these memories, the snap of her cigarette lighter. The dull rage came again. His stomach filled with the heat, which was not entirely unpleasant. Smoking. She was smoking. They had had a few of Tom Rogan's special seminars on the subject. Here she was, doing it again. She was a slow learner, all right, but a good teacher is at his best with slow learners. Yes, she said now. Uh-huh. All right. Yes. She listened, then uttered a strange, jagged laugh she'd never heard before. 2 things, since you ask. Reserve me a room and say me a prayer. Yes, okay. Uh-huh. Me too. Good night. She was hanging up as he came in. He meant to come in hard, yelling at her, put it down, right now. Oh no, put it out, now, right now. When he saw her, the words died in his throat. He had seen her like this before, but only 2 or 3 times. Once before their first big show, once before the first private preview showing for national buyers, and once when they had gone to New York for the International Design Awards. She was moving across the bedroom in long strides, the white lace nightgown molded to her body, the cigarette clamped between her front teeth. God, he hated the way she looked with the butt in her teeth. Sending back a little white riband around her left shoulder like smoke from a locomotive stack. It was her face that really gave him pause, that caused the planned shout to die in his throat. His heart lurched. Bam! And he winced, telling himself that what he felt was not fear, but only surprise at finding her this way. She was a woman who really came alive all the way only when the rhythm of her work spiked toward the climax. Each of those remembered occasions had been career-related. At those times he had seen a different woman than the one he knew so well. A woman who fucked up his sensitive fear radar with bursts of wild static. The woman who came out in times of stress was strong but high-strung, fearless but unpredictable. There was lots of color in her cheeks now, a natural blush high on her cheekbones. Her eyes were wide and sparkly, not a trace of sleep left in them. Her hair flowed and streamed. And looky here, friends and neighbors. Oh, you just looky right here. She's taking a suitcase out of the closet. A suitcase, by God, she is. Reserve me a room. Save me a prayer. Well, she wasn't going to need a room in any hotel, not in the foreseeable future, because little Beverly Rogan was going to be staying right here at home, thank you very much, and taking her meals standing up for the next 3 or 4 days. She very might well need a prayer or 2 before he was done with her. She tossed the suitcase on the foot of the bed and then went to her bureau. She opened the top drawer and pulled out 2 pairs of jeans and a pair of cords, tossed them into the suitcase. Back to the bureau, cigarette streaming smoke over the shoulder. She grabbed a sweater, a couple of t-shirts, one of the old ship and shore blouses that she had looked so stupid and refused to give up. Whoever had called her sure hadn't been a jet setter. This was dull stuff, strictly Jackie Kennedy, hip highness sport weekend stuff. Oh, my eyes aren't working. Can't see. Not that he cared about who had called her or where she was going, since she wasn't going anywhere. Those were not the things which pecked steadily in his mind, dull and achy from too much beer and not enough sleep. It was that cigarette. Supposedly she had thrown them all out. She had held out on him. Proof was clamped between her teeth right now. Because she still had not noticed him standing in the doorway, he allowed himself the pleasure of remembering the 2 nights which had assured him of his complete control over her. Oh my gosh, my body's not doing well right now. I don't want you to smoke around me anymore, he told her as they headed home from a party in Lake Forest. October that had been. I have to choke that shit down at parties and at the office, but I don't have to choke it down when I'm with you. You know what it's like? I won't tell you the truth. It's unpleasant, but it's the truth. It's like having to eat someone else's snot. He thought this would bring some faint spark of protest, but she had only looked at him in her shy, wanting to please way. Her voice had been low and meek and obedient. All right, Tom. Pitch it then. She pitched it. Tom had been in good humor for the rest of that night. A few weeks later, coming out of a movie, she unthinkingly lit a cigarette in the lobby and puffed it as they walked across the parking lot to the car. Then a bitter November night, the wind chapping like a maniac and the exposed square inch of flesh it could find. Tom remembered that he had been able to smell the lake, as you sometimes could on cold nights, a flat smell which was both fishy and somehow empty. Let her smoke the cigarette. He even opened the door for her when they got to the car, got him behind the wheel, closed his door, and then said, Bev. She took the cigarette out of her mouth, turned towards him, inquiring, and he unloaded on her pretty good, his hard, open hand striking across her cheek hard enough to make his palm tingle, hard enough to rock her head back against the headrest. Her eyes widened with surprise and pain, something else as well. Her own hand flew to her cheek to investigate the warmth and tingling numbness there. She cried out, Ow, Tom! He looked at her, eyes narrowed, mouth smiling casually, completely alive, ready to see what would come next, how she would react. His cock was stiffening in his pants, but he barely noticed. That was for later, for now school was in session. He replayed what had just happened, her face. What had that third expression been, there for a bare instant, then gone? First the surprise, then the pain, then the nostalgia. Like of some memory. It had only been for a moment. He didn't think she even knew it had been there, on her face, on her mind. Now. It would all be in the first thing she didn't say. He knew that as well as his own name. It wasn't you son of a bitch. It wasn't see you later, Macho City. It wasn't we're through, Tom. She looked at him with her wounded, brimming, hazel eyes and said, Why'd you do that? Then she tried to say something else but burst into tears instead. Throw it out. What? What, Tom? Her makeup was running down her face in muddy tracks. He didn't mind that. Kind of liked seeing her that way. It was messy, but there was something kind of sexy about it, too. Slutty. Kind of exciting. The cigarette. Throw it out. Realization dawning, and with it, guilt. I just forgot! That's all! Throw it out, Bev. You're going to get another shot. She rolled the window down and pitched the cigarette, then turned back to him, her face pale and scared and somehow serene. You aren't supposed to hit me. That's a bad basis for a lasting relationship. She was trying to find a tone, an adult rhythm of speech, and failing. It regressed her. He was in this car with a child, voluptuous and sexy as hell, but a child. Can't and aren't are two different things, Keed, he said. Kept his voice calm, but inside he was jittering and jiving. And I'll be the one to decide what constitutes a lasting relationship and what doesn't. If you can live with that, fine. If you can't, you take a walk. I won't stop you. I might kick you in the ass as a going away party, but I won't stop you. It's a free country. What more can I say? Maybe you've already said enough, she whispered, and he hit her again. Harder than the first time, because no broad was ever going to smart off the Tom Rogan. He would pop the Queen of England if she cracked smart to him. Her cheek banged the padded dashboard. Her hand groped for the door handle, then fell away. She only crouched in the corner like a rabbit, one hand over her mouth, her eyes large and wet and frightened. Tom looked at her for a moment, and then he got out and walked around the back of the car. He opened the door. His breath was smoke in the black, windy November air, and the smell of the lake very clear. Want to get out, Bev? Saw you reach for the door handle, so I guess you must want to get out. Okay. That's all right. I asked you to do something, and you said you would. Then you didn't. So you want to get out? Come on. Get out. What the fuck, right? Get out. You want to get out? No, she whispered. What? I can't hear you. No, I don't want to get out, she said a little louder. What, those cigarettes getting you? Emphysema? I don't even know. Well, the cigarette's giving you something? If you can't talk, I'll get you a fucking megaphone. This is your last chance, Beverly. Speak up so I can hear you. Do you want to get out of this car, or do you want to come back with me? I want to come back with you, she said, and clasped her hands on her skirt like a little girl. She wouldn't look at him. Tears slipped down her cheeks. All right, he said. Fine. But first you say this for me, Bev. Say I forgot about smoking in front of you, Tom. Now she looked at him, her eyes wounded, pleading, inarticulate. Can't make me do this, her eyes said. Please don't. You can make me do this, her eyes said, but please don't. Don't, I love you. Can't it be over? No, it could not, because that was not the bottom of her wanting, and both of them knew it. Say it. I forgot about smoking in front of you, Tom. Good. Now say I'm sorry. I'm sorry, she repeated dully. The cigarette lay smoking on the pavement like a cut piece of fuse. People leaving the theater glanced over at them. The man standing by the open passenger door of a late model faded into the woodwork Vega. The woman sitting aside, her hands clasped primly in her lap, head down, the dome light outlining the soft fall of her hair and the gold. He crushed the cigarette out. He smeared it against the black top. Now say, I'll never do it again without your permission. I'll never... Her voice began to hitch. Never... Say it, Bev. Never to do it again without your permission. So he slammed the door and gone back around to the driver's seat, got behind the wheel and drove them back to his downtown apartment. Neither of them said a word. Half the relationship had been set in the parking lot, the second half set 40 minutes later in Tom's bed. She didn't want to make love, she said. He saw a different truth in her eyes and the strutty cock of her legs, however. When he got her blouse off, her nipples had been rock hard. She moaned when he brushed them and cried out softly when he suckled the first one, then the other, kneading them restlessly as he did so. She grabbed his hand and thrust it between her legs. Thought you didn't want to, he said, and she had turned her face away, but she did not let go of his hand, and the rocking motion of her hips actually speeded up. He pushed her back on the bed, and now he was gentle, not ripping her underwear, but removing it with careful consideration that was almost prissy. Sliding into her was like sliding into some exquisite oil. He moved with her, using her, but letting her use him as well. And she came the first time almost as once, crying out and digging her nails into his back. And they rocked those strokes, and somewhere in there he thought she came again. Tom would get close, and he would think of White Sox battling averages, or who was trying to undercut him, from the Chelsea account at work. He would be okay again. Then she began to speed up, her rhythms finally dissolving to an exciting bucking. Looked at her face, the raccoon ringlets of her mascara and smeared lipstick, felt himself suddenly shooting deliriously toward the edge. She jerked her hips up harder and harder. There had been no beer gut between them in those days, and their bellies clapped hands in a quickening beat. Near the end, she screamed and then bit his shoulder with her small, even teeth. How many times did you come? He asked her after they had showered. She turned her face away, and when she spoke, her voice was so low he couldn't almost hear it. That isn't something you're supposed to ask. No? Who told you that, Mr. Rogers? He took her face in one hand, thumb pressing deep into one cheek, fingers pressed into the other, palm cupping her chin in between. You talk to Tom, he said. Hear me, Bev. Talk to Papa. 3, she said reluctantly. Good, he said. You can have a cigarette. She looked at him, distrustfully, her red hair spread over the pillows, wearing nothing but a pair of hip-hugger panties. Just looking at her, that way his motor turning over again. Just looking at her that way got his motor turning all over again. He nodded. Go on, he said. That's all right. They'd been married in a civil ceremony 3 months later. 2 of his friends had come. The only friend of hers to attend had been Kay McCall, whom Tom called that titsy woman's lib bitch. All of these memories went through Tom's mind in the space of seconds, like a speeded-up piece of film as he stood in the doorway watching her. She'd gone to the bedroom drawer of what he called her weekend bureau, and now she was tossing underwear into the suitcase, not the sort of stuff he liked, the slippery satins and smooth silks. This was cotton stuff, the little girl stuff, most of it faded with little puffs and popped elastic on the waistbands. Cotton nightie that looked like something out of the Little House on the Prairie. She poked in the back of this bottom drawer to see what else might be lurking in there. Tom Rogan, meanwhile, moved across the shag rug towards the wardrobe. His feet were bare and his passage noiseless as a puff of breeze. It was a cigarette. What had really gotten him mad. Been a long time since she had forgotten that first lesson. There had been other lessons to learn since, a great many, and there had been hot days where she had worn long-sleeved blouses or even cardigan sweaters buttoned all the way to the neck. Gray days where she had worn sunglasses. But that first lesson had been so sudden and fundamental. He had forgotten the telephone call that had wakened him out of his evening sleep. It was a cigarette. She was smoking now that she had forgotten Tom Rogan. Temporarily, of course, only temporarily. But even temporarily was too damn long. What might have caused her to forget didn't matter. Such things were not to happen in this house for any reason. There was a wide black strip of leather hanging from the back hook inside the closet door. There was no buckle on it. He had removed that long ago. It was doubled over at one end where a buckle would have gone, and this double-over section formed a loop into which Tom Rogan now slipped his hand. "Tom, you've been bad," his mother had sometimes said. Well, sometimes maybe was not a good word, maybe often would have been a better one. "You come here, Tommy. I got to give you a whoopin'." His life as a child had been punctuated by whoopings. He had finally escaped to Wichita State College, but apparently there was no such thing as complete escape, because he continued to hear her voice in dreams. "Come here, Tommy. I got to give you a whoopin'. Whoopin'." He had been the eldest of four. 3 months after the youngest had been born, Ralph Rogan had died. Well, died maybe not such a good word. Maybe committed suicide would have been a better way to put it, since he had poured a generous quantity of lye into a tumbler of gin, and quaffed this devil's brew while sitting on the bathroom hamper. Mrs. Rogan had found work at the Ford plant. Tom, although only 11, became the man of the family. And if he screwed up, if the baby shot her ditties after the sitter went home, and the mess was still in them when Mom got home, if he forgot to cross Megan on the Broad Street corner after her nursery school got out, and then noisy Mrs. Gant saw, as if he happened to be watching American Bandstand while Joey made a mess in the kitchen. If any of those things happened, or 1,000 other things happened, then after the smaller children were in bed, the spanking stick would come out, and she would call the invocation, "Come here, Tom, I gotta give you a whoopin'." Better to be a whooper than the whooped. If he had learned nothing else on the great toll road of life, he had learned that. So he flipped the loose end of the belt over once and pulled the loop snug, and he closed his fist over it. It felt good. Made him feel like a grown-up. The strip of leather hung from his clenched fist like a dead black snake. His headache was gone. She found one last thing in the back of the drawer, an old white cotton bra with gun-shell cuffs. The thought that this early morning call might have been from a lover surfaced briefly in his mind and then sank again. That was ridiculous. Woman going away to meet her lover did not pack her faded chip-and-shore blouses and her cotton Kmart undies with the pops and snarls in the elastic. Also, she wouldn't dare. "Beverly," he said softly, and she turned at once, startled, her eyes wide, her long hair swinging. Belt hesitated, dropped a little. He stared at her, feeling that little bloom of uneasiness again. Yes, she had looked this way before the big shows, and he hadn't gotten in her way, understanding that she was so filled with a mixture of fear and competitive aggressiveness that it was as if her head was full of illuminating gas. A single spark and she would explode. She had seen the shows not as a chance to split off from Delia fashions, to make a living, or even a fortune on her own. If that had been all, she would have been fine. But if that were all, she also would not have been so ungodly talented. She had seen the shows as a kind of super exam on which she would be graded from. Oh my gosh, I can't read right now. I'm so sorry. Where was I? She had seen those shows as a kind of super exam on which she would be graded by fierce teachers. What she saw on these occasions was some creature without a face. It had no face, but it did have a name. Authority. All of that wide-eyed nerviness was on her face now. But not just there, it was all around her, an aura that seemed almost visible, a high-tension charge which made her suddenly both more alluring and more dangerous than she had seemed to him in years. He was afraid because she was here, all here. The essential she was apart from the she Tom Rogan wanted her to be, that she he had made. Beverly looked shocked and frightened. She also looked almost madly exhausted. Her cheeks glowed with hectic color, yet there were stark white patches below her lower lids which looked almost like a second pair of eyes. Her forehead glowed, which sorry. Her forehead glowed with a creamy resonance. The cigarette was still jutting out of her mouth, now at a slight up angle, as if she was goddamn Franklin Delano Roosevelt. The cigarette. Just looking at it caused dull fury to wash over him in a green wave. Faintly, far back in his mind, he remembered her saying something to him one night at the dark, speaking in a dull, listless voice. "Someday you're going to kill me, Tom. You know that? Someday you're just going to go too far. That will be the end. You'll snap." He'd answered, "You do it my way, Bev, and that day will never come." Now before that rage blotted out everything, he wondered if that day hadn't come after all. Cigarette. Never mind the call, the packing, the weird look on her face. They would deal with the cigarette. Then he would fuck her. Then they could discuss the rest. By then it might not even seem important. "Tom," she said. "Tom, I have to." "You're smoking," he said. His voice seemed to come from a distance, as if over a pretty good radio. "Looks like you forgot, babe. Where you've been hiding them." "Look, I'll put it out," she said, and went to the bathroom door. She flipped the cigarette. Even from here he could see the teeth marks driven deep into the filter, to the bowl of the John. Fists. She came back out. "Tom, that was an old friend. An old friend. I have to—" "Shut up. That's what you have to do," he shouted at her. "Just shut up." But the fear he wanted to see, the fear of him, was not on her face. There was fear, but it had come out of the telephone, and fear was not supposed to come to Beverly from that direction. It was almost as if she didn't see the belt, didn't see him, and Tom felt a trickle of unease. Was he here? It was a stupid question, but was he? The question was so terrible and so elemental that for a moment he felt the danger of coming completely unwrapped from the root of himself and just floating off like a tumbleweed in the high breeze. Then he got hold of himself. He was here all right. That was quite enough fucking psychobabble for one night. He was here. He was Tom Rogan. Tom by God Rogan. And this dippy C-word didn't straighten up. And if this dippy C-word did straighten up and fly right in the next 30 seconds or so, she was going to look like she got pushed out of a fast-moving boxcar by a mean railroad dick. "Got to give you a whooping," he said. "Sorry about that, babe." He had seen that mixture of fear and aggressiveness before, yes. Now for the first time it flashed out at him. "Put that thing down," she said. "I have to get to O'Hare as fast as I can." "Are you here, Tom? Are you?" He pushed the thought away. The strip of leather which had once been a belt swung slowly like a pendulum. His eyes flickered, and he held fast to her face. "Listen to me, Tom. There's been some trouble back in my hometown, very bad trouble. I had a friend in those days. I guess he would have been my boyfriend, except we weren't quite old enough for that. He was only an 11-year-old kid with a bad stutter back then. He's a novelist now. You've even read one of his books, I think. The Black Rapids?" She searched his face, but his face gave no sign. There was only the belt penduluming back and forth, back and forth. He stood with his head lowered and his stocky legs slightly apart. Then she ran her hand restlessly through her hair, distractedly, as if she had many important things to think of, and hadn't seen the belt at all. That haunting, awful question resurfaced in his head again. "Are you there? Are you sure?" The book laid around here for weeks and I never made the connection. Maybe I should have, but we're older and I haven't even thought about Derry in a long time. Anyway, Bill had a brother, George. George was killed before I really knew Bill. He was murdered, and then the next summer. But Tom had listened to enough craziness from within and from without. He moved in on her fast, cocking his right arm back over his shoulder like a man about to throw a javelin. The belt hissed a path through the air. Beverly saw it coming and tried to duck away, but her right shoulder struck the bathroom doorway, and there was a meaty whap as the belt struck her left forearm, being a red wheal. Oh my gosh, that was one of my vocab words in AP Lang. Wheel. Anyways. Gonna whoop you, Tom repeated. His voice was sane, even regretful, but his teeth showed a white and frozen smile. He wanted to see that look in her eyes, that look of fear and terror and shame, the look that said, "Yes, you're right, I deserved it." The look that said, "Yes, you're there all right, I feel your presence." And love could come back. That was right and good because he did love her. They could even have a discussion if she wanted to, of exactly who called and what this was all about. But that must come later. For now, school was in session. The old one, too. First the whoopin', then the fucking. Sorry, babe. Tom, don't do that. He swung the belt sidearm and saw it lick around her hip. There was a satisfying snap as it finished on her buttock. Then, and Jesus, she was grabbing at it. She was grabbing at the belt. For a moment, Tom Rogan was so astounded by this unexpected act of insubordination that he almost lost his punisher. Would have lost it except for the lube, which was tucked securely into his fist. He jerked it back. "Don't you ever try to grab something away from me," he said, hoarsely. "You hear me? If you ever do that again, now you'll spend a month pissing raspberry juice." "Tom, stop it," she said, and her very tone infuriated him. She sounded like a playground monitor talking down to a tantrumy 6-year-old. "I have to go. This is no joke. People are dead, and I made a promise a long time ago." Tom heard little of this. He bellowed and ran at her with his head down, the belt swinging blindly. He hit her with it, driving her away from the doorway and along the bedroom wall. He cocked his arm back, hit her, cocked his arm back, hit her, cocked his arm back, hit her. Later that morning, he would not be able to raise his arm above eye level until he swallowed 3 codeine tablets. But for now, he was aware of nothing but the fact that she was defying him. She had not only been smoking, she had tried to grab the belt away from him, and oh, folks, oh, friends and neighbors, she had asked for it. He would testify before the throne of God Almighty that she was going to get it. He drove her along the wall, swinging the belt, raining blows on her. Her hands were up to protect her face, but he had a clear shot of the rest of her. The belt made thick bullwhip cracks in the quiet room, but she did not scream, as she sometimes did, and she did not beg him to stop as she usually did. Worst of all, she did not cry as she always did. The only sounds were the belt and their breathing, his heavy and hoarse, hers quick and light. She broke for the bed and the vanity table on the side of it. Her shoulders were red from the belt's blows, her hair streamed fire. He lumbered after her, slower but big, very big, as he played squash until he had popped an Achilles tendon years ago. Since then his weight had gone out of his hand a little bit, or maybe a lot would have been a better way to put it. But the music was still there, firm, corded, sheathed and fat. Still, he was a little alarmed at how out of breath he was. She reached the vanity, and he thought she would crouch there, or maybe try to fall under it. Instead, she groped, turned, and suddenly the air was full of flying missiles. She was throwing cosmetics at him. A bottle of Chantilly struck him squarely between the nipples, fell to his feet, shattered. He was suddenly enveloped in the gagging scent of flowers. "Quit it!" he roared. "Quit it, you bitch!" Instead of quitting it, her hands flew along the vanity's littered glass top, grabbing whatever they found, throwing it. He groped at his chest where the bottle of Chantilly had struck him, unable to believe she had hit him with something, even as other objects flew around him. The bottle's glass stopper had cut him, but it was not much of a cut, little more than a triangular scratch, but there was a certain red-haired lady who was going to see the sun come up from the hospital bed. Oh yes, there was a certain lady who... A jar of cream struck him above the right eyebrow with sudden cracking force. There was a dull thud seemingly inside his head. White light exploded over that eyes filled of vision. He fell back a step, mouth dropping open. Now a tube of Nivea cream struck his belly with a small slapping sound, and she was she? Was it possible? Yes! She was yelling at him. I'm going to the airport, you son of a bitch. Do you hear me? I have business and I'm going. You want me to get out of my way you might want to get out of my way because I'm going. Blood ran into his right eye, stinging and hot. He knuckled it away. He stood there for a moment, staring at her as if he had never seen her before. In a way he never had. Her breasts heaved rapidly, her face all flushed and livid and paler, blazed. Her lips were drawn back from her teeth in a snarl. She had almost denuded the top of the vanity table. The missile silo was empty. He could still read the fear in her eyes, but it was still no fear of him. You put those clothes back, he said, struggling not to pant as he spoke. That would not sound good. That would sound weak. Then you put the suitcase back and get into bed. If you do those things, maybe I won't beat you up so bad. Maybe you'll be able to get out of the house in 2 days instead of 2 weeks. Tom, listen to me, she spoke slowly. Her gaze was very clear. If you come near me again, I'll kill you. Understand that? You tell the guts? I'll kill you. And suddenly, maybe it was because of the utter loathing on her face, the contempt, maybe because she had called him a tub of guts, or maybe only because of the rebellious way her breast rose and fell. The fear was suffocating him. It was not a bud or a bloom, but a whole goddamn garden. The fear, horrible fear that he had not been here. Tom Rogan rushed to his wife, not bellowing this time. He came as silently as a torpedo cutting through the water. His intent now was probably not merely to beat and subjugate, but to do to her what she had so rashly said she would do to him. He thought she would run, probably for the bathroom, maybe for the stairs. Instead, she stood her ground. Hips whacked the wall as she threw her weight against the vanity table, pushing it up and toward him, ripping 2 fingernails down to the quick when the sweat on her palms caused her hips to slip. For a moment, the table tottered on an angle, then she shoved herself forward again. The vanity waltzed on one leg, mirror catching the light and reflecting a brief swimming aquarium shadow across the ceiling. Then it tilted forward and outward. Its leading edge slammed into Tom's upper thighs and knocked him over. There was a musical jingle as bottles tipped over and shattered inside. He saw the mirror strike the floor on his left and threw an arm up to shield his eyes, loosening the belt. Glass coughed across the floor, silver on the back. He felt some of its sting drawing blood. Now she was crying, breath coming in hitched, screamy sobs. Time after time she had seen herself leaving him, leaving Tom's tyranny as she had left that of her father, stealing away in one night, bags piled in the trunk of her cat lass. She was not a stupid woman, certainly not stupid enough, even now, standing in the rim of this incredible shambles, to believe that she had not loved Tom and did not in some way love him still. But that did not preclude her fear of him, her hate of him, and her contempt of herself for choosing him for dim reasons buried in the time that should be over. Her heart was not breaking, it seemed rather to be broiling in her chest, melting. She was afraid the heat from her heart might soon destroy her sanity in fire. But above all this, yammering steadily in the back of her mind, she could hear Mike Hanlon's dry, steady voice. It's come back, Beverly. It's come back, and you promised. The vanity heaved up and down, once, twice, a third time. It looked as if it were breathing. Moving with careful agility, her mouth turned down at the corner, and jerking as if in prelude in some sort of convulsion, she skirted the vanity, toe-stepping through the broken glass, and grabbed the belt, just as Tom heaved the vanity off to one side. Then she backed up, sliding her hand into the loop. She shook her hair out of her eyes and watched to see what he would do. Tom got up. Some of the mirrored glass had cut one of his cheeks, a diagonal cut traces a line as fine as thread across his brow. He squinted at her as he rose slowly to his feet, and she saw drops of blood on his boxer shorts. You just give me that belt, he said. Instead, she took 2 turns of it around her hand and looked at him defiantly. Quit it, Bev. Right now. If you come for me, I'm going to scrap this. If you come for me, I'm going to scrap the shit out of you. I'm going to strap the shit out of you. The words were coming out of her mouth, but she couldn't believe it was her saying them. And just who was this caveman in the bloody undershorts anyway? Her husband? Her father? The lover she had taken in college who had broken her nose one night, apparently on a wound? Oh God, help me, she thought. Help me now. And still her mouth went on. I can do it. You're fat and slow, Tom. I'm going. And I think maybe I'll stay gone. I think maybe it's over. Who's this guy, Denbro? Forget it. She realized almost too late that the question had been a distraction. He was coming for her before the last word was out of his mouth. She whirred the belt through the air in an arc, and the sound it made when it smashed across his mouth was the sound of a stubborn cork coming out of a bottle. He squealed and clapped his hands to his mouth, his eyes huge, hurt, and shocked. Blood began to pour between his fingers and over the backs of his hands. You broke my mouth, you bitch! He screamed and muffled. Oh, God, he broke my mouth! He came at her again, hands reaching, his mouth a wet red smear. His lips appeared to have burst in 2 places. The crown had been knocked from one of his front teeth. As she watched, he spit it to one side. Part of her was backing away from the scene, sick and moaning, wanting to shut her eyes. But the other Beverly felt the explosion of a death row convict freed in a freak earthquake. Beverly felt the exultation of a death row convict freed in a freak earthquake. That Beverly liked all this just fine. I wish you'd swallow it, that one thought. Wish you'd choked on it. It was this latter Beverly who had swung the belt for the last time. The belt he had used on her buttocks, her legs, her breasts. The belt he had used on her times without number over the last 4 years. How many strokes you got depended on how badly you'd screwed up. Tom comes home and the dinner's cold. 2 with the belt. Deb's working late at the studio and forgot to call home. 3 with the belt. Oh, hey, look at this. Beverly got another parking ticket. 1 with the belt across the breasts. He was good. Barely bruised it. It didn't even hurt that much, except for the humiliation. That hurt. And what hurt worse was knowing that part of her craved the hurt, craved the humiliation. Last time, pays for all, she thought, and swung. She brought the belt in low, brought it inside arm, and it whacked across his balls with a brisk yet heavy sound, the sound of a woman striking a rug with a carpet beater. That was all it took. All the fight promptly went out of Tom Rogan. He uttered a thin, strengthless shriek and fell on his knees as if to pray. His hands were between his legs, his head was thrown back, cords stuck out on his neck. His mouth was tragically grimace of pain. His left knee came down squarely on a heavy, pointed hook of shattered perfume bottle, and he rolled silently over on one side like a whale. On one hand left his balls to grab his squirting knee. Blood, she thought. Dear Lord, he's bleeding everywhere. He'll live, this new Beverly, the Beverly would seem to surface at Mike Hanlon's phone call, replied coldly. Guys like him always live. You just get the hell out of here before he decides he wants to tangle some more, or before he decides to go down cellar and get his Winchester. She backed away and felt pain stab her foot as she stepped on a chunk of glass from the broken vanity mirror. She bent down to grab the handle of her suitcase. She never took her eyes off him. She backed out the door and backed down the hall. She was holding the suitcase in front of her in both hands, and it banged her shins as she backed. Her cut foot printed bloody heel prints. When she reached the stairs, she turned and went down quickly, not letting herself think. She suspected she had no coherent thoughts left inside anyway, at least for the time being. She felt a light pawing against her leg and screamed. She looked down and saw that it was the end of a belt. It was still wrapped around her hand. In the dim light, it looked more like a dead snake than ever. She threw it over the base banister, her face a wink of disgust, saw it land in an S on the rug of the downstairs hallway. At the foot of the stairs, she grasped the hem of her white late-night gown, cross-handed, and pulled it over her head. It was bloody, and she would not wear it 1 second longer, no matter what. She tossed it aside and billowed it onto the rubber plant by the doorway of the living room like a lacy parachute. She bent naked to the suitcase. Her nipples were cold, hard as bullets. "Beverly, you get your ass upstairs!" She gasped, jerked, then bent back to the suitcase. She was strong enough to scream that loud. Her time was a good deal shorter than she had thought. She opened the case and pawned out panties, a blouse, and an old pair of Levi's. She jerked these on, standing by the door, her eyes never leaving the stairs. Tom did not appear at the top of them. He bawled her name twice more, and each time she flinched away from the sound. Her eyes hunted, her lips pulling back from her teeth in an unconscious snarl. She jabbed the buttons of the blouse through the holes as fast as she could. The top 2 buttons were gone. It was ironic how little of her own sewing ever got done. She supposed she looked quite a bit like a part-time hooker for one last quickie before calling it a night. It would have to do. "I'll kill you, you bitch! You fucking bitch!" She slammed the suitcase closed and latched it. The arm of the blouse poked out like a tongue. She looked around once, quickly, suspecting that she never would see this house again. She discovered only relief at this idea and opened the door and let herself out. She was 3 blocks away, walking with no clear sense of where she was going when she realized her feet were still bare. The one she had cut, the left, throbbed dully. She had to get something on her feet, but it was nearly 2 o'clock in the morning. Her wallet and her credit cards were at home. She felt in the pockets of her jeans, and not so much as a penny, and came up with nothing but a few puffs of lint. She didn't have a dime, not so much as a real penny. She looked around at the residential neighborhood she was in. Nice homes, manicured lawns and paintings, and dark windows. And suddenly she began to laugh. Beverly Rogan sat on a low stone wall, her suitcase between the dirty feet, and laughed. Stars were out, and how bright they were. She lifted her head back and laughed at them, the wild exhilaration washing through her again like a tidal wave that lifted and carried and cleansed, a force so powerful that any conscious thought we lost. Only her blood thought, and its one powerful voice spoke to her in some inarticulate way of desire, although what it was to desire she neither knew nor cared. It was enough to feel that warmth filling her up with its instance. It was enough to feel that warmth filling her up with its instance. Desire, she thought, and inside her that tidal wave of exhilaration seemed to gather speed, rushing her onward towards some inevitable crash. She laughed at the stars, frightened but free. Her terror as sharp as pain and as sweet as a ripe October apple. And when a light came on in the upstairs bedroom of one of the house, this shone. In an upstairs bedroom of the house the stone wall belonged to, she grabbed the handle of her suitcase and fled off into the night, still laughing. And that is where we are stopping today because I cannot read anymore. All right. Yeah. So we're almost done with the 6 phone calls. Woo! Yeah. Yep, that's all. Yeah. You guys have fun? I had fun. Oh. I'm just looking at what you guys were saying. As I'm curious what you guys were talking about. Yeah. Yeah. We are on page 125 now. About to finish the last part of chapter 3. And then next time we will do that, and we will also read Dairy, the first interlude, which I don't know what's like it is in the table of contents. It's just Dairy, the first interlude. It's not a chapter or anything. I don't even know. It's the end of part 1. I don't know. We'll just say chapter 3, part 3 and the first interlude. So, all right. I hope you all have a great night. Yeah. Hope I see you, or see you. I hope you guys will see me next week. Yeah. If you need to catch up on any other chapters, you can check out my channel. All the lives are converted into videos over there. This one will be converted in a solid, 12 hours. It takes a while to do it because it's such a long video. That's all. Good night, guys. Sweet dreams. Hope you guys can sleep so well and soundly after hearing this book and the story. All right. Thank you for watching. Good night.